Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff Mom Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio.
Yes, and welcome to another edition of Monday Mini. And we are going to go ahead and timestamp this because this is current events in the U.S. But today is September 29th, 2021. And this week has been fairly significant as the recent trial for R. Kelly, or actually Robert Sylvester Kelly, has been happening.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll go ahead and put this here. Content warning, trigger warning. We're not going to go too in-depth on details, specifically with the victims and or any of the acts being alleged. But there is some conversations about sexual violence, kidnapping, abuse, manipulation, so many things that are toxic and vile pertaining to R. Kelly. So if this is not something you want to hear today, understand, go ahead and flip it off and come back. Although right now there's a little bit of good news. So
yes,
just put this caveat there.
Yes. So for those of you who somehow were able to avoid the atrocious things that Kelly has been accused of and recently convicted for, we're going to do a quick review.
Right. So he's become one of the most talked about predators to date. And even though rumors have swirled around him for a very long time, especially after what I would call odd relationships, because nothing was confirmed, even though we all assumed, and it turned out to be correct, that he had with Aaliyah. Again, it was later confirmed that he did get married to her. They forged her age, they forged her ID, and that he went and pretty much paid off a bunch of people to get this done. And that he did it possibly because she was pregnant at the time. And by the way, that would mean that she was under the age of 15 when all that happened. Just put that there. And it wasn't until recently he was arrested with charges of sex trafficking and racketeering.
Many victims have alleged severe forms of abuse, manipulation, sexual assault, controlling tactics, and even being forced to write letters that he used against them if they tried to leave or get away from him. And if you have been keeping up with the stories, you know that many of the victims suffered intense trauma at the hands of this man and his associates who have only enabled him.
Right. And Kelly was initially arrested in July 2019 and has been held for trial, which was delayed due to the pandemic. Don't feel bad about that. And his arrest did not happen until after an investigative report from BuzzFeed, which followed the case of one specific girl whose parents desperately were seeking a way to get her out away from Kelly, who had a giant house here in Atlanta, as well as the very detailed documentary of surviving R. Kelly, which was on, I believe, the Lifetime Network. And the 6-hour documentary looked at the different allegations that had been around him for years, including several different court cases, which resulted in civil suits and payouts for some of the victims.
Kelly was charged for multiple offenses, including 11 charges of sexual assault and abuse against a minor aged 13 and 16. The documents describe, quote, sex and oral sex with a minor by the use of force or threat of force. And he has brought a lot of controversy from so many, including the fact he tried to intimidate and harass witnesses before the trial, before being arrested, and tried to defend himself in one of the most cringe-worthy interviews with Gayle King after the documentary was released.
Right. And he even released a new song talking about how he kind of got away with it and that no one can touch him. Real gross stuff. And throughout his trial, his lawyers have tried everything in the victim blaming playbook. And by the way, right before his trial, a couple of his representatives at that time resigned, saying that he couldn't work with the other lawyers that he had hired. So he had a kind of a big switchover. And so the things that they actually tried to use against a lot of the people who were testifying into claiming that these victims were groupies who were bitter that Kelly ended the relationships, or that they were trying to get money, or that they were just out for fame, all sounds familiar. They also tried to paint Kelly as the victim of rabid fans who tried to take advantage of him. Always this giant flips, of course. But I don't know if you've been following, and if you have, many of the people that the defense tried to put on stand to defend Kelly, they botched it up pretty hard, contradicting themselves throughout their own testimony. So it was kind of a mess. Delightfully that they were being called out quickly for their contradictions. And since the beginning of the trial, which started on August 18th, this year, many witnesses have come forward to relay the trauma and abuse inflicted on the victims. And if you do go and see some of the testimony and some of the reports, it's harrowing and heartbreaking.
And due to the fact that he and his associates were depicted in organizing to recruit and transport underage girls over state lines for illegal sexual purposes, including the production of child sex abuse images, as well as conspiracy to obstruct justice by destroying evidence and bribing or threatening witnesses, he was charged with sex trafficking and violating the Mann Act, which makes it illegal to transport anyone across state lines for any immoral purpose. And on September 27th, after 9 hours of deliberation, Kelly was convicted on all counts. And as victims watched to see if justice would be served, many were able to breathe again.
Right. And Jarhonda Pace, one of the brave women who testified at his trial, stated in an Instagram post after the verdict was read, quote, "Today, my voice was heard. For years, I was trolled for speaking out about the abuse that I suffered at the hands of that predator. People called me a liar and said I had no proof. Some even said I was speaking out for money. Speaking about abuse is not easy, especially when your abuser is high profile."
And founders of the hashtag #MuteRKelly, who pushed organizations, record labels, radio stations, and concert venues to drop R. Kelly, also spoke out in regards to the verdict. They said they hoped the verdict, quote, "brings some sense of justice to the brave survivors who came forward." And creator Orenike Odele said, "Right now, I'm so relieved." And she said that moments after the verdict, and went on, "I am sure happiness and elation will follow. This has been such a journey for me and Kenyatta, but most importantly for the women who have been asking for justice for close to 3 decades. He is also facing charges in Illinois and Minnesota and will be back for sentencing on May 4th.
Right. So there is a lot going on. And I don't know about you, Annie, but when R. Kelly's name comes up, there's so much controversy and so many conversations. As in fact, over the weekend, someone was playing a playlist off of Spotify, and it was just one of those generic Spotify created lists. So you just kind of like, oh, cool, 96, cool. And R. Kelly's song came on, and I got very adamantly angry. I was like, can you please turn this? And they kind of were shocked. And one person was like, oh yeah, it's bad, but man, this song still rocks. And I was like, no, nothing about this makes me happy. And even complimenting it, and I know you're joking, is such a slap in the face for any victim. It just made me very sad that he's getting that reaction, that whole acceptance of, yeah, but separate the artist. No, that's bullshit. He actually sung about being with younger women and actually being completely controlling over these women, and really saw that as a flex. And it's so disgusting to me in so many ways, but to have people defend him, even to this day, with so much testimony and so many similar stories, that's the part that blows my mind. It's this cannot, okay, once or twice, I'll give you a small percentage of maybe. But for this many stories, after years and years and years of victims repeatedly coming out, come on. There's so many out there that is unreal. And I'm really happy to see that this justice has come about, especially after what already happened with Bill Cosby, and hopefully it'll stick, as well as the fact that the 2 other states will also be having trial with him soon. He's not going to be sentenced for several more months, so at the very least, we know he's going to be just sitting there at that point in time. So there is some justice to that, and I hope that this gives some of the women who have gone through so much, and actually there was a couple of young men who had talked about he had victimized them as well, but I hope this brings them some type of relief and some type of healing on this giant journey in order to get past all of that trauma.
Yeah. Yes, for sure. And I'm sure we'll be keeping an eye on this, revisiting in the future. In the meantime, listeners, as always, we would love to hear from you. If you would like to email us, you can, or email us stephanieandmomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can also find us on Twitter @momstuffpodcast or on Instagram @stuffmomnevertoldyu. Thanks as always to our super producer, Christina.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff Mom Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.